Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Hart Bennett, and today I'm going to read Chapter 11a from my book, Seven Sisters, The Voyage. When the crew uncovered the hatches and daylight came down to the 'tween decks the next morning, the saints began to rouse themselves from their berths with questioning looks as to what had happened to the ship the night before. They were surprised when they realized they had slept so long. It was after 9 o'clock. Then, looking around at the disaster their sleeping quarters had become, they recalled with terror the broaching of the ship. President Tippett took charge of his ward. "Brothers and sisters, we made it through the night, and the storm has lessened considerably because of our faith and prayers. The Lord has given us hours of rejuvenating sleep, so we can now tackle the task of cleaning up our sleeping quarters, which I must say look like where the storm was centered rather than on deck." The saints chuckled in agreement. "May I suggest that we put our minds to the task and turn this place back into a clean and tidy bit of heaven," said Tippett, trying to engender enthusiasm. The saints took this invitation to heart, and soon everyone was cleaning up their individual areas without complaint. A bucket brigade formed and sent the ankle-deep water up the stairs of the hatchway to be tossed over the bulwark. In a matter of a few hours, the 'tween decks were put back in the way they were before, minus some wet clothing and bedding, which was hung up to dry after the drenching. When President Bramwell went topside to assess the damage up there, the storm was still blowing and raining, but had considerably less force than 4 hours earlier. The waves were high, but not crashing over the deck. President Hudson walked toward Bramwell with his hand outstretched. "President Bramwell," he said as he shook his hand, "I don't know how this ship stood up after that broaching last night, whether it was the hawsers, the anchor, or a combination of waves, but the fact that we are not at the bottom of the ocean this morning is something for which we can thank our lucky stars." "Or perhaps the creator of our lucky stars," said Bramwell with a knowing smile. The captain chuckled, catching his meaning. "Yes, I'll have to say it was miraculous the way the ship stood up after almost sinking last night. In any case, it looks like the danger is past, and hopefully we won't be running into any more storms like this before we reach New York. You'll be glad to know that some of the crew are down working on getting the steering tackle made up again." "That is wonderful news," said Bramwell gratefully. "President, the crew will need help cleaning the deck," Hudson said, pointing to the mess of torn sails, splintered poles, and tangled cordage all over the deck. "The foretop mast is leaning starboard, with only a few lines to keep it from tumbling to the deck. That will be our top priority." "My men and I are at your command, Captain," pledged President Bramwell. As they worked below, the saints recalled the near disaster they had just lived through, and although they had been tossed around violently during the storm and the broaching of the ship, there were only a few cuts and bruises among the whole company. Remarkably, none of the sailors were swept over the side when the big wave hit. Presidents Tippett, Sloane, and Palmer marveled as they scraped the 'tween deck. "Did you see how the crew worked in the storm?" said President Tippett. "They never fell down once. Whereas the saints, well, it was as difficult for one to fall alone as it would be for a 10-pin to fall alone among its tottering throng." Sloane laughed and shook his head. "The adage is true, once a man, twice a child." "The way the storm quieted down last night was quite miraculous," President Palmer added. "The infidel would say it would have been so anyway. I say, give God the glory." Sloane turned to Marcus, who was behind them scrubbing. "How would you put it poetically, Brother Fielding?" Marcus stopped and put his brush in his bucket. "The power of the priesthood curbed the fury of old Boreas, who, as soon as the bits were out of his mouth, would snort in the gale like a prancing steed, requiring all the faith on board to rein him in, until at length a certain few in an indescribable circle fettered him. Ever since, stubborn old Boreas has been more tractable to his riders, and promises to continue to be so until he lands them again." Everyone nearby laughed heartily at the imaginative metaphor Marcus described. Most of the saints working below were oblivious to what was happening on deck. They had been forbidden to go topside until the crew and 30 of Bramwell's men had cleaned all the wreckage and secured the masts and sails. By late afternoon, the ocean mounds had leveled out, and the captain was now ready to concentrate on repairing the damaged foremast. Straight up from the deck, about 15 feet, there was a visible crack, and the top part of the mast leaned precariously a few degrees starboard, held only by 3 lines. Titus and Alfie climbed up the ratlines and carefully nailed boards all around the mast just below the crack. Then they set flat iron pieces on top of the board and wrapped chains around the iron several times. "It's ready, Captain," yelled down Titus. The captain looked at the saints and crew, who were manning the newly secured lines on both sides of the mast. "Slow and easy, men. Let's bring the top part of the mast in line with the bottom. All together now. Heave!" The lines tightened and the pole moved. Men on counterlines added resistance to keep the pole from going past its apex. As they did this, Titus and Alfie tried to cinch the chains even tighter. The mast was close to being upright when, without warning, the ship bobbed dramatically to the larboard side, and a huge cracking sound was heard as the mast swung beyond its mark and started to give way. "Look out, she's coming down," yelled Griswold from below as he rushed to get out of the way. "Clear the deck," shouted the captain. Alfie let his chain go and scrambled down, but Titus stayed and tried to hang on to his, pulling it with all his strength. "Titus, let it go," ordered Captain Hudson. Titus was determined but realized he couldn't succeed, so he let his chain go and quickly climbed down a few rungs, then jumped the final 6 feet to the deck. There he scrambled to get up and run to safety just as the mast snapped in two and the top portion came crashing down, carrying lines and rigging behind it. Titus dove to get out of the way, but the mast came down and bounced on his outstretched leg. Titus screamed in pain as his thigh bone broke with a horrible, sharp, cracking sound. The mast continued its momentum, rebounding up, then down again, just missing his feet. When the crew was sure the mast had come to rest, they ran to retrieve Titus, who was still face down on the deck. His screaming told them that his injury was serious. As they carefully turned him over, they could see his trousers were soaked with blood midway up the thigh. There in the center was a tear with something protruding from it. The men blanched in horror as they recognized the jagged stub of a bloody bone staring through the trousers. "Easy, man, let's get him down to Doc Bell," said the captain. Titus was in agony as he put his arms around the shoulders of Alfie and Griswold. Huntley carried the unbroken leg, while the captain and President Bramwell supported each part of the broken leg. They all tried to lift him gently, but he alternately yelled, roared, and cursed at them each time they jarred his leg. As they approached the infirmary, the doctor heard the ruckus outside and swung the door open to receive the injured patient. "Put him on the table, men," he said as his wits kicked in to the task at hand. The men moved past the doctor and put Titus down on the elevated table in the center of the room. Alfie, Griswold, and Huntley promptly left, shaking their heads sympathetically. The unkempt doctor took a knife from the top drawer in the cabinet and with shaking hands began to cut the trousers open. Upon revealing the entire wound and seeing the mangled mess surrounding the bone, he took the captain by the arm and pulled him away from the rest. Consulting for a few minutes, the doctor stepped back to Titus and announced tactlessly, "Your leg will have to come off." Titus became wild-eyed. No, I won't let you take off my leg. You can do something else, can't you? You're not cutting off my leg." The captain for once agreed with the doctor. "Titus, I don't think we want to take the chance of gangrene setting in before this heals." Titus was unconvinced. "If I'm willing to take the chance, you ought to be able to." Then he looked directly at Bramwell and pleaded, "President Bramwell?" President Bramwell was surprised that Titus was bringing him into this. He pondered the possibilities for a moment and then said, "If your leg can be pulled straight so the bone goes back into place, there might be a slight chance it will heal, but the pain will be excruciating." "Just give me some rum and something to bite down on," Titus bargained. "Griswold can hold me." The doctor stepped up. "Well, I guess I could give it a try, even though I've never seen anyone heal from a fracture of this nature without amputation." Titus turned to Captain Hudson and blurted loudly, "Captain, I don't trust Doc Bell. I want President Bramwell to do it." The doctor was flabbergasted. What are you saying? I could do it, he said defensively. I should be doing this. I'm the doctor here. If you don't let me do this, I'll register a formal grievance, Captain. The captain was fed up. Doc Bell, you're so liquored up you couldn't find his leg to pull it. Now stand back. The doctor whimpered under his breath as he moved to a corner of the room. Griswold and a bottle of rum were sent for, and Titus began taking large swigs as Bramwell took off his coat and finished cutting away Titus's trousers. I'm ready, Titus announced after draining the bottle. Then he put a piece of rolled-up leather between his teeth, and Griswold took his position above his head. Titus raised his arms up and held on to Griswold's biceps with both hands. Captain Hudson held the unbroken leg as Bramwell positioned himself to pull the broken one to reconnect it to its normal position. As everyone did his job, Titus let out a horrible grunting scream. He had never felt such searing pain, even from his lashings. Those on deck in close proximity of the infirmary were deeply affected by what they heard. Then silence reigned. Titus had passed out. A few days later, Eleanor needed to pick up some medicine from the infirmary for Sister Clotworthy. She hated dealing with the doctor, but she had no other choice, and she knew Titus was still in there, which terrified her. But she figured he would be incapacitated so she could quickly get the medicine and be on her way. She opened the door a crack, her heart racing, and peeked inside. She saw Titus on the table and Dr. Bell getting into his medicine cabinet. She took a deep breath, pushed the door open quietly, and tiptoed around the outside of the room, keeping a wary eye on Titus. He appeared to be suffering greatly. She noticed that the sheet covering his leg was black with blood and had greenish-yellow stains where his wound was located. She could tell the wound was infected by its rank odor. Dr. Bell, she said quietly. He jumped and clutched his heart. You startled me, he said, hiding a small bottle behind his back. I came to get some arrowroot, she said, her voice shaking as she glanced at Titus. Well, get it and get out, the doctor said abruptly. Can't you see this sailor is sick? Yes, Dr. Bell, I can see he is very sick, said Eleanor with concern. She found the arrowroot quickly and left the infirmary, moving straight to the top deck where she looked for her sisters. Lizzie and Caroline were the only ones she could see promenading the deck. She soon caught up to them and spoke breathlessly. I was just in the infirmary getting medicine for Sister Clotworthy and saw Titus on the bed, delirious with fever. He is deathly ill, and the doctor could barely function. He is so drunk. He was hiding a medicine bottle behind him. That must be how he smuggled his liquor aboard. Lizzie knew the doctor was negligent. Alfie got a nasty gash on his forehead during the storm, she said, and the doctor wouldn't even tend to it. He hasn't been sober since we left London. Eleanor continued. The doctor just growled at me to get out and give him some rest. Him meaning Titus or the doctor, said Caroline sarcastically. Even if Titus is a despicable human being, said Caroline, he shouldn't have to die because of some incompetent doctor. I'm going to ask President Tippett to take a look at him. He has more medical sense than Dr. Bell ever had. Eleanor left her sisters and moved to the bridge to see if she could spot President Tippett. She finally located him talking to a group of missionaries at the bow of the ship. After drawing his attention, she motioned for him to join her. Come with me to the infirmary, she urged. I want you to see something. As they walked along, she filled him in on the state of the doctor and Titus. Tippett grew concerned and then became angry. He rapped firmly on the door of the infirmary, then entered without waiting to be admitted. Dr. Bell, may I take a look at Mr. Holt's leg? The doctor tried to block Tippett's view. No, he is my patient, he slurred. His leg is doing just fine. The captain told me to take care of his bandages, and that's what I've been doing. I changed the bandage this morning, but I seem to have run out of salts. Tippett wasn't buying his excuses. Stand aside, he ordered as he pushed the doctor out of the way and sent him careening across the room into a chair. Tippett pulled the sheet down to reveal the leg. Eleanor stepped forward a little to see better. He unwrapped the blood and pus-soaked bandages, which caused Titus to come to and moan and writhe in pain. The odor that emitted from the open wound was nauseating. Tippett buried his nose in his sleeve, and Eleanor lifted her skirt and held it tightly over her nose. The wound was black, bloody mess, mottled with white gangrene. Oh, Eleanor exclaimed in horror. At that moment, Titus opened his eyes and unexpectedly reached toward Eleanor. "You'll save my leg, won't you? Please save my leg." His frantic eyes drilled deeply into hers. Eleanor recoiled in fear and hid behind Tippets. Her heart hammered as she felt she was suffocating. Her feelings were identical to that horrific night in the fog, and she began trembling uncontrollably. President Tippets turned to comfort her. Almost immediately, Titus laid his head back down on the sweat-soaked pillow and dropped off into unconsciousness again. Tippets looked at the doctor. "Go tell the captain and President Bramwell to come down here immediately." The doctor didn't move. "Now!" boomed Tippets. The fearful doctor staggered up and stumbled out the door. When President Bramwell and the captain arrived, trailed by the doctor, Tippets was settling Eleanor down in a chair. The captain held a handkerchief to his nose as he looked at the wound. "This leg has definitely got to come off now," he announced. The captain gloated. "See, I told you." Just then Titus startled him by struggling to sit up. "I heard what you said. You're not going to amputate my leg. Do you hear me? I'd rather die than be half a man the rest of my life. I want to talk to President Bramwell." The captain pushed Titus back down. "He has no authority over you," he said. You're under my jurisdiction, and if we don't cut off your leg now, you'll be dead in 24 hours. Bramwell stepped within Titus's eyeline. "What is it you want, Mr. Holt?" he asked. Titus sounded remarkably coherent. "I want you to pray and give me a blessing like you did the ship the other night during the storm." Bramwell was taken aback. "No offense, Titus," he said, "but I don't think you have the necessary faith." Unfazed by this disparaging remark, Titus continued tearfully. "I saw what you did in the storm. Your prayer saved the ship. I know your God can heal me. I know it." No one was more surprised than Captain Hudson at Titus's change of heart. He knew firsthand just how much Titus had hated and persecuted the saints on the voyage. Bramwell contemplated for a moment what he should do. "All right, I'll do it," he said quietly. "President Tippets, will you assist me?" "Yes, President." The captain wondered if his authority was being usurped as Bramwell continued his directions. "Everyone, please leave," he said decisively. Titus turned his head from side to side, and seeing Eleanor standing in the back, he reached toward her once again. "I want Sister Wise to stay," he said in a compelling plea. Eleanor was stunned at this request. She shrank further back, not knowing how to react to this unwanted attention. The captain finally acquiesced to President Bramwell and ushered the resisting doctor from the room. Relieved that the doctor was gone, Titus looked up at Bramwell. "President, I'm ready for my blessing. I know there's a higher being who can heal me if you ask him." President Tippets anointed Titus with consecrated oil. Titus listened intently, even though the pain was showing on his face. President Bramwell pronounced the priesthood blessing, during which time Titus tried to suppress his moans. He was wringing wet with sweat. Eleanor stood nearby and looked on with tears brimming, then spilling down her cheeks. President Bramwell concluded his prayer. "Thy will be done, O Lord. Amen." Titus gritted his teeth in pain as he strained to whisper, "Amen." Then he collapsed. Eleanor panicked. "Is he dead?" No, he just passed out," said Tippets. There was a silent moment. Then President Bramwell turned to Eleanor. Sister Wise, I would like to assign you to clean the gangrene out of Titus's wound and wash and dress it 3 times a day." Eleanor froze in shock as Bramwell continued. "I know this man attacked you, and I will understand if you want to decline this request. No one would think worse of you. But we cannot leave him to the doctor. You are the head of the health committee under President Tippets' priesthood authority. I will ask him to be present with you at all times to make sure Titus doesn't have a setback in judgment. You can have your family of sisters help you also." Eleanor's fears seemed to subside as she fully weighed the request. "President Bramwell," she began, "this man has had an extreme hatred of the Mormons, but now he has asked for a blessing. His injury has forced him to reevaluate his life. If he can humble himself enough to ask for help, the least I can do is try to help him. Can I count on you to assist, Sister Wise, President Tippets?" "Yes, President," he answered with certainty. Bramwell smiled. "Good. Now I suggest you get started. You can cut away the infected flesh and clean the wound while he's unconscious. We've got to do our part so the Lord can do his part. As Bramwell left, Eleanor rolled up her sleeves. She started to cut away the infected flesh, hesitantly at first. Then, gaining confidence, she began working with intensity. President Tippets went to get some boiling water and returned just as Eleanor had finished up with the removal of the gangrene. After inspecting the wound, Tippets helped Eleanor wash it thoroughly. Eleanor next poured some brandy into the wound, which caused Titus to moan loudly as though he were having a terrible dream. A startled Eleanor stepped back momentarily, then continued disinfecting the wound as Titus fell back into a deep sleep. They would wait until morning to see if they got all the gangrene, and then they would proceed to further cleanse and disinfect the wound. You'd better get some rest, Sister Wise. I'll stay and keep watch. I made arrangements for some of the ward caregivers to spell me off during the night. Eleanor was relieved as a flood of thankfulness swept over her body. She had been able to do what she never thought she could do, try to help save the life of Titus. Thank you, President, she said. I couldn't have done anything without your help today. I'll return early in the morning. Eleanor knew Titus was still critical and far from being healed, but she and Tippets had taken the first step to prepare him for the Lord's healing power. Eleanor was emotionally drained when she returned to her berth. Her sisters were all questions, but she was too tired to answer them. Are you all right? How is Titus? What happened in there? Sisters, please. I have an important task for each of you tomorrow. I will explain everything then. Please forgive me, but I must get some sleep now. I'm exhausted. The sisters immediately ceased their chatter and helped to get Eleanor settled down in her berth. They had heard rumors all day about Titus's condition and were dying to know what went on in the infirmary with their friend and sister. That's the end of chapter 11a. Over and out. Oops.